Hello, Sergeants Major. This is Sergeant Major Jason Leeworthy from USASMA. Before we begin, I want to make should be rather obvious disclaimer. This is not an official Army video. This is just Jason Leeworthy trying to help you out, get started for your Capstone literature review. I like to talk about two things in this video. First is what is a literature review, and then the steps you're going to go through, the process to write your literature review and submit your documents throughout this condensed course. But before I get to that, this is a condensed course. Obviously, the Class 45 and resident students have a lot longer to write a literature review, but please don't panic, okay? At the end of the day, this is only an 8 to 10 page research paper. To that end, I would encourage you should probably play to your strengths on this one. Write about something you know, select a topic that you have some familiarity with, unless you just have lots of free time, you're not working or anything else, you're just doing this for the next 4 months, then you might want to do that. But otherwise, like I said, I would stick with a topic that you're already familiar with. So that said, what is a literature review exactly? It's just a research paper, Sergeant Majors, where you're going and looking at reviewing published materials from subject matter experts in a certain field of study and Army reports and things like that, as opposed to you going out and doing surveys or conducting interviews or creating controlled groups and doing experiments or something like that. So you're not going to do any of the latter. You're just going to find current and relevant peer-reviewed scholarly work in that field. You need about at least four good academic sources, probably 5 to 6 is a little bit better, not including Army policy. Army policy is fine to put in there, but you need at least a minimum of 4, 5 to 6 is probably good. And go do good research into those, and then and get started writing your paper. So what are the steps that you're going to use in the drafts you're going to submit? So the first 2 steps that you're going to do is you're going to identify your topic, right? You've went through all your Sergeant Major course, and all you had the broad, departments that you went through. If you look on the student guide, you'll see the goal of the capstone assignment is a completion of an 8-10 page essay on a current strategic topic of interest related to your component and or CMF that incorporates the following. Now, are we going to be overly dogmatic about you writing something to your CMF? Not necessarily, as long as it relates to the Army. Now, that said, please don't make it about the National Defense Strategy or Homeland Security or anything like that. It needs to relate to the Army. Okay? So, and it says, incorporates the following learning objectives. Apply the joint functions, analyze the concept of unified land operations, force management, leadership, and workforce management. Now, you don't have to incorporate all those into one paper, Sergeant Major. That would be a ridiculous paper, okay? So those are your broad topics where you want to start with. So you want to think back to your course and in one of those broader areas that you had some interest in. And from there, what you want to do is narrow your topic, okay? And I would recommend that you start early on this. We don't want a paper that says, why it's important to be a good leader as a Sergeant Major. Way too broad, okay? You could potentially write a higher level paper where you're tackling something like Army readiness, but and key components of Army readiness. If you're a very good writer and you can get the data, but that's going to be hard to do in an 8 to 10 page paper. So if you're going to write about like readiness or something like that, I would really encourage you to make it more specific and drill down, like dental readiness or physical fitness readiness or something more specific. If you try to tackle a very broad or really high philosophical point, if you're a really good writer, go for it, Sergeant Major. But again, 8 to 10 pages, so something like that. If you're writing 40-page thesis for a capstone for your graduate level work, that's fine. But this is not that level, so keep it simple. Cool. Okay, and so you want to identify your broad topic. Hopefully, you can drill down some to that narrow topic, and then you want to frame that problem. What is the problem in the Army? Now, Sergeant Major, for this, you have to be specific, and the scope is important here. If you're going to argue that recruiting, the unethical conduct is a problem throughout the entire Army, then you have to have data, research data that supports that and provides evidence that, yes, this is not just at your regional command or not just at your state, but this is a problem in the whole Army. Now, that said, if your research can't support that thesis, then tailor it down to the appropriate level. Okay, and that's I wrote a little bit about that there in the scope. So the right scope there for your paper. Okay, so that's draft number 1 that you're going to submit. And then let's move into step number 2. Okay, in the second draft, and that's your research questions and strategy, and then your literature review and your reference list. So for your research questions and strategy, Sergeant Major, the analysis is really what we're looking at. Okay, we want you to step back and take an objective look. Even if you already feel very strongly about a certain topic or something like that, like if you're going to write about SHARP or EO or the Army, spending too much money on paper or whatever, try to be objective and look at both sides. That's where we're looking in your capstone, that critical analysis of that topic. And please don't just regurgitate Army policy, okay? If you're going to write about SHARP, for example, don't just go through and just keep rehashing Army policy and, okay, we understand that, but we want you to take a hard look at the Army policy. Is there, possible ways that it could be improved, or maybe the policy is not good? And I'm going to insert some arbitrary examples here. Hazing, when I came in almost 29 years ago, it was kind of accepted practice within the Army. And then I'd been in a couple years, and Army was like, no more. So they established a no hazing policy and stuff like that. So it was a practice that was accepted, and then people came along and said, hey, this is not the way we need to treat soldiers, and out with hazing. So that's where we want you to look at a practice or something like that. How are you going to tackle that? How are you going to address that and analyze that? Be objective. Look at if there's multiple sides of, and there's always two sides of every coin. There's if you don't agree with Army spending in a certain area, try to look at the other side and say, okay, well, why did the Army try to go this way and spend this money here? Or if it's something as simple as Army online training, okay, it's mandatory training. You can say, oh, it's ridiculous. We just sit and watch these IMI videos. It's retarded. But there's some practical use in being able to sit down by yourself. Okay, it takes 30 minutes. I review it annually versus having to march the whole battalion or company into a auditorium and get a briefing or something like that. So again, try to be objective as you approach your topic there, and what exactly are you looking for in your research? How are you going to get after it? Okay, that was research questions and strategy. Okay, next, so your literature review. This is where you're going to actually start digging into those regulations and digging into those articles or books, again, by professional, PhD holding scholars in that field of study. If you're going to study PTSD, get in there and look at the issue from multiple angles, okay? For example, I give you PTSD. There's an idea that, okay, if you have PTSD, hey, we need to keep these soldiers in and medicate them and retain them because the Army owes it to them. That's a kind of philosophy. There's another philosophy that says, hey, this medication, all this medication that we're doing is just wrecking these folks. Let's go ahead and process them out, get them to the VA, and let them get their treatment because ultimately they're harming readiness. Okay, so you can tie that back into readiness there. But it's more harmful to keep them in, or is it better to keep them in and treat them? So there's different philosophical ideas about that. So you want to get in that literature, and you don't have to necessarily have a dogmatic fixed position even when you start this research. Okay, you can be kind of open mind about it and say, okay, where does the research take me, right? And then your reference list, obviously that's the research documents and books and stuff that you're going to use to support that. Now, what I'm going to do, or I would encourage you to do for this second draft here, is write what's called an annotated bibliography. And there's an example in the supplemental folder, same place this video is. So you can write a annotated bibliography, and so you would list in APA format. You'll list your reference, your source, and then you're going to give like a paragraph summary about what are you going to use, how is this document helping you, and you can kind of kill two birds with a stone that way. It's you're describing how you're using that literature, and also there's your reference. Boom, right there. It's a little bit easier. So I think that'll help you for that. Okay, draft number 3. Moving along. Okay, so next, after you've done this literature review, you're gonna, in your draft number 3, step 3, you're gonna submit a summary of your findings. Okay, you've done your research, you looked at both sides of the equation, you looked at multiple perspectives. This is what you've come away with. Now your thesis should be finalized at this point. Okay, you should definitely know which side you're gonna argue. If you're gonna argue, again, PTSD, we should keep the folks in, or no, we should put them out. Here's your points of arguments. And you can certainly include, you know, contrary arguments within your paper itself. I don't want to get into right now about actually writing the paper, but you can say, here's point A, here's the counterpoints, and then this is why my position's better. So you're going to have like a summary, a paragraph or two, good summary of how you're going to write it. Like, this is my thesis, and these are my primary points of argument. Probably should have an outline, really, with that even. So, okay, and then finally, links to practice and policy. And this is, when you write your actual paper, you're going to shape this section in kind of your recommendations. Okay, this is, I've gone through all my arguments. Here's my thesis, here's my arguments. Now here's my summary of it, and based on Army policy, how does what you've researched and everything affect Army practice and Army policy? Okay, hazing, and we need to change it. Army policy needs to change, or this is a good policy, like women in combat. You know, here's what I've researched, and the Army policy that allows women in combat is good, or it's not good. Now, one thing I want to warn you about, Sergeant Majors, is be careful about topics that don't have a lot of research yet. We're not that far. We're a couple years into women in combat arms. You probably have to be careful. I don't know how many, you know, how much information is out there about, you know, the women in combat units and stuff like that. Same thing with the ACFT. Sergeant Majors, it's not implemented yet. I know everyone wants to write about the ACFT for some reason, but it hasn't been implemented. So don't try to predict the future too much. You can make some maybe reasonable speculations and things like that in your recommendations, but keep them balanced and not, you know, too far out there. You know, the Space Force. Maybe let's not write about the Space Force quite yet, as much as I'd like to. You can see all my nerd stuff there in the background. But okay, so then once you do that, you write your conclusion, a summary of the entire paper, and things like that. So that is the general overview. What is the literature review? These are the steps that you'll go through, and then obviously you'll submit your final paper. So I will have another video. If you like this one, if you think it's garbage, then I won't make another one. But I will have another video specifically that talks about the paper, the formatting of the paper, your introduction, and things like that. So I hope this is helpful to some of you. And if you have any questions about it, by all means, please feel free to give me a call or email. Thanks. Bye.